Welcome back to Close Up. The race for governor got some clarity over the last few days as Portsmouth Mayor Declan McEachern announced he's not running. That leaves former executive councillor Cindy Warmington as the only mainstream Democratic candidate and now the likely favorite for her party's nomination. But it's still a short runway to November with a formidable incumbent in the corner office at the State House. Councillor Warmington is our guest this morning on Close Up. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to be back.
So let's start with an issue that I think has more depth of interest than many we've seen in a long time right now, and that's state auto inspections and the state's efforts to repeal those. A federal judge just ordered the state to restore the program during an ongoing legal battle. If you were in the corner office right now, would you tell everyone to comply?
I would always comply with federal law, but I think that the point here is that I support the change that the legislature made that is reflecting the will of the people, and I do not think that this was executed appropriately. And you know, the governor and the legislature was warned that this may happen, and they did not take appropriate steps to make sure that we were in compliance with federal law. And of course we do have to obey federal law.
Yeah, and the process of sort of extricating the state from the Clean Air Act aspects of this is going to take about 18 months. If you were governor in January, obviously this is going to take a long time. Are you instructing the Commissioner of Safety to bring back and expedite some kind of emissions testing to be in compliance with the Clean Air Act?
Well, we have to comply with federal law. I mean, state law does not trump federal law, and we have to comply with federal law. So we would take appropriate steps. But really, the governor should be reaching out to the EPA to make sure we're doing everything we can to expedite the process and get the waiver that we need so that the law can actually go into effect.
So how do you message that to the people of New Hampshire then, say in January, say, okay, well, we do have to bring back something?
Well, we have to comply with federal law. I think most people understand that.
So a lot of people are getting fired up over this proposed ICE facility in Merrimack, and those plans are allegedly no more at this point. Governor Ayotte helped achieve the outcome that the town wanted. If you were governor, do you think a more combative approach would have had the same result?
I think that this governor, this was a really mishandled situation. This governor should have been saying no to a human warehouse in Merrimack from the beginning. The people of the state do not want this facility in their town, and the governor really dragged her feet. She scapegoated one of her own employees over this. She evaded the issue for weeks and weeks, and it was only when thousands of people took to the streets, and I was proud to join them, to say that we will not have a human warehouse. We don't warehouse human beings. We will not have that in our state. But Kelly Ayotte is still yet to say no to a human warehouse elsewhere in our state. As governor, I would say no, nowhere in New Hampshire.
And yet, how do you stop something like that? Obviously, the federal government has a lot of power to do what it wants.
Right. The people of New Hampshire will speak, and I know that they will turn out in great numbers, because they already have, to make their desires known that we will not have this in our state.
As governor, would you sign legislation to limit local law enforcement cooperation with ICE?
So when I was on the Executive Council, I voted for every dollar of border security money that came to our state, and I believe that we need to have strong borders in our state. But what I disagree with is these brutal and inhumane tactics of ICE. And so, yes, our law enforcement will cooperate with ICE if they have a warrant or have documentation to pick up a convicted criminal or somebody that should be brought into custody. But no, our local law enforcement are not going to assist ICE in breaking down the doors of American citizens without a warrant, of ripping babies away from their mothers, of putting 5-year-old children in detention, of brutalizing people on the streets, or executing American citizens on our streets. No, we will not be cooperating with that.
If elected, will you repeal the ban on sanctuary city policies?
You know, I think that there were only 2 in the state at the time, and there was no impact of those. And so I don't think that's an issue that I would be focusing my attention on. I'm really going to focus on the things that matter most to the people of our state. You know, in our state right now, people are seeing their Property taxes are skyrocketing due to Kelly's school voucher program. Their health care premiums have doubled, in part because of what she has done in increasing premiums in Medicaid, but also her failure to stand up to Donald Trump with his doubling of health care premiums for the people of our state, and her failure to stand up to Trump on tariffs that are increasing the price of groceries, of housing, of utilities. I mean, we really need a change of direction in this state. The people of our state are really suffering, and as you know, Adam, I know what that's like. When I was young, my parents went bankrupt. By age 17, I was financially on my own. I worked 2 jobs to get through college, and I know what it's like to not be able to pay the bills. And the people of the state are suffering right now, and that's where we need to be focusing our attention.
There's another part of your background that's already under attack again in the last cycle. You did face criticism over your past work on behalf of Purdue Pharma and lobbying in the opioid issue and work for pain clinics. Again, those attacks are underway, and they're likely to amplify even more as you head towards the likely nomination. You know, in 2024, your defense didn't work out. You didn't win. Are you going to handle this issue any differently in this cycle? You know,
I am not surprised that Kelly Ayotte is attacking me for legal work I did 24 years ago, before the lies of Purdue Pharma were known. I think it is the height of hypocrisy, though, because Kelly Ayotte herself, as Attorney General, was uniquely positioned to sound the alarm about what Purdue Pharma was doing in this state, uniquely positioned to warn doctors and to save lives. And she didn't do that. She, in fact, failed to join the lawsuit against Purdue Pharma that 26 other states did join, that brought hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, or would have brought, to our state. And we lost out on that money that could have been used to save lives. And then, as soon as she left office as Attorney General, she started collecting contributions from Big Pharma, the opioid industry, hundreds and thousands of dollars, and even took money from the Sackler family, the owners of Purdue Pharma, as late as 2016, when everybody knew what Purdue Pharma was up to. So I think that Kelly Ayotte attacking me is just because she doesn't want to be held accountable for her own record, what she did on this issue.
Are you saying, though, that she should have been calling you out 20 years ago?
In 24 years ago, no one knew about the lies that Purdue Pharma, well, not no one, but we certainly didn't know. The medical community certainly didn't know about the lies that Purdue Pharma was telling. But Kelly Ayotte, as Attorney General in 2007, certainly did know. States all around the country brought this lawsuit. Kelly Ayotte failed to join it and then collected hundreds of thousands of dollars.
What about the voters who were looking for just a little bit more of kind of a mea culpa, of an acknowledgement that this was not the right thing to do?
I think that I'm going to stay focused. I mean, Kelly Ayotte is going to continue to hit me on that, and she is going to continue to focus on my past, long past illegal work. I'm going to continue to stay focused on the issues that matter to the people today. I think that people here are opening up their property tax bills, and they are shocked to see them soaring. Many people are going without health care right now. And I've had doctors just in the last few days telling me that patients now have no health insurance, are coming and they have medical issues that need to be addressed, and they cannot get the care they need. I had a doctor the other day said he had a patient with blood in their stools and couldn't do a colonoscopy, another patient with nodules in their lungs and couldn't do an MRI. This is what's going on in our state right now. Every cost is skyrocketing. People can't afford to feed their families, and housing costs have hit a record high under Kelly Ayotte. She is not focused on the working families of our state, and that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
As you try to advance an agenda if you're elected governor, are you planning to bring back the interest and dividends tax?
No, I think that the people of our state need to, cannot really afford a new tax right now. We will have no income tax, we'll have no sales tax on my watch. I can't even imagine putting a new burden on the working people of our state right now.
What about the business
taxes,
taxes, though? Business profits, business enterprise, would you raise those to try and gain more revenue?
So what we're going to do is what every family around New Hampshire does. We're going to sit around the table and we're going to build a budget from the ground up. That's what I do at home. That's what everyone around the state does at home. And that's what we need to do in the legislature, to build a budget that really works for the people of New Hampshire.
Are you planning to repeal the ban on transgender girls or boys who identify as girls in interscholastic sports?
You know, I think that that issue for me is one that we need to make sure that every child is treated fairly and feels cared for and welcomed in our school system. And I think that there are probably 5 kids in the state that this affects, and that this issue is best handled on a case-by-case basis.
Do you want to see the law repealed, though?
I don't know that the law, it needs to be in effect. I think that the law is best handled on a local level. I think that this is a local control issue. Ideally, this is a local control issue.
And so you would repeal the law to give local the ability to make their own decisions? I'm
going to work with the local communities to see how we can best handle this in a way that every single kid feels welcome. I mean, I think it is a very important thing that we not have any kind of hatred being promulgated towards these young children that are dealing with this difficult issue.
All right, Councilor Warmington, thanks for joining us on Close Up, and we'll catch you out there on the campaign trail.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, and we'll be right back with how local business leaders are responding to the recent Supreme Court ruling on tariffs.